Step out of the car now. The officer's voice cut through the afternoon air in a supermarket parking lot in a small rural Texas town. The intense golden sunlight reflected off old Joe's silver hair and the deep wrinkles that lined his face. A map of a long, hard-working life. His eyes, faded blue with time, opened wider, not with fear, but with weary surprise. He had only stopped to buy bread and milk. The scene around him was a composition of humiliation. Two rookie officers, their uniforms still pristine, exchanged smiles and knowing glances, clearly enjoying the situation. The officer who gave the order, a young man named Deputy Miller, leaned against the door of Joe's old car, a 1983 Chevrolet Impala with faded green paint and a rusty front bumper. "What are you doing here, Grandpa? Driving without purpose?" Miller's question came laden with disdain that echoed in the still air. His colleagues chuckled, a muffled sound that amplified the oppressive heat. Joe was still seated at the wheel, his bony hands firm on the worn leather. He took a deep breath, feeling his heart beat with an uncommonly accelerated rhythm. "I'm just heading home," he said, his voice a hoarse but audible whisper. The response seemed to fuel the deputy's arrogance. "Home? Or do you mean the asylum?" The ensuing laughter was louder, crueler. Joe could feel the weight of other people's stares in the parking lot, customers pausing with their bags, watching the spectacle. Miller yanked open the car door. The interior was clean but showed years of use. There was an old coat on the passenger seat, a coffee thermos in the door, and a small faded emblem hanging from the rear-view mirror. "What do you have in your luggage? A treasure trove of memories?" Miller poked the coat with his baton. "Or perhaps a manual on how to be a useless old man?" The crowd, now a dozen strong, murmured. Some filmed with their cell phones. For Joe, each word was a low blow. An ancient, long-dormant rage began to boil in his veins. He was a patient man, but there was a limit. Miller's final phrase seemed to echo in the vacuum. "Respect is something you have to earn, Grandpa." Joe looked into the young deputy's eyes, trying to see the person behind the misused authority. He saw only the void of arrogance. Before he could respond, Miller turned to his colleagues, seeking approval, and collective laughter erupted again. Joe was cornered, not just by Miller, but by a system he had once sworn to serve and protect. The tension was a steel wire about to snap. He remembered his years of service, the difficult decisions, the lives saved and lost. The respect he had always believed to be a fundamental right was being trampled in a dusty parking lot. And then, at the height of the humiliation, as Miller prepared to search the car's trunk with an air of triumph, a clear, cold thought crossed Joe's mind. It's time to remind them that some lessons are learned too late. He finally got out of the car, a slow and deliberate movement that denoted a dignity the situation could not corrupt. He was aware of every stare, every bated breath. Miller approached, his smile an empty gesture. "What do you have to say for yourself, Grandpa?" he provoked, invading Joe's personal space. The public watched, a heavy silence hanging over everyone. "I said, I'm heading home," Joe repeated, his voice now firm as rock. But Miller wasn't interested in answers. He was interested in the spectacle. He turned to the car and, with a theatrical gesture, pointed to the trunk. "Let's see what other surprises you keep in there. Open it." Joe inserted the key into the rusty trunk lock. His heart pounded in his chest, not with fear, but with a solemn anticipation. The trunk opened with a metallic creak, revealing an impeccably organized interior, a stark contrast to the car's decaying exterior. In the center lay a dark blue hard garment bag. Through an acetate window, a uniform was visible. Not a costume, but the ceremonial uniform of a state police chief, its epaulets carrying the weight of golden insignia, its rows of decorations perfectly aligned. Beside it, a polished mahogany box held medals that glinted even in the dim light. Miller looked inside and let out a shrill laugh, a sound that cut the air like broken glass. "Good heavens, what is this? Did you dress up for a retiree convention?" His eyes scanned the rookies, encouraging their laughter. He reached out and pulled the uniform out, holding it by the fabric as if it were a rag. "Where did you get this, old man? A charity bazaar?" Joe remained motionless, but his breath deepened. "Put that back," he ordered, and his voice was no longer that of a frail old man. It was a voice that carried the echo of long-forgotten authority. Miller, intoxicated by his own power, laughed in his face. "Or what? You're going to arrest me?" He tossed the uniform back into the trunk haphazardly, one of the epaulets hitting the edge with a dry thud that made Joe wince. It was then that Miller saw the mahogany box. He picked it up, opened the lid, and took out one of the medals, a golden star attached to a blue and silver ribbon. "And this? Did I buy it at a hardware store?" He tossed it up, letting it fall onto the hot asphalt. The sound of metal hitting the ground was a dry, profane clink. It was the breaking point. The public humiliation, the absolute disrespect for everything those symbols represented, a life of service, sacrifice, and honor, hit Joe like a punch to the gut. As Miller turned to search Joe's bag, spilling its contents onto the asphalt, a pack of cigarettes, an old Zippo lighter, a simple wallet, Joe's hands, trembling but resolute, found his cell phone in his coat pocket. Under the pretense of leaning against the rear bumper, he slid his finger across the screen. There was no need to dial. There was a single emergency button, a direct contact he had never thought necessary to use. He pressed it. Once. A green light flashed, confirming the transmission. He didn't utter a single word. He just put the phone away and raised his head, his gaze meeting Miller's. The deputy, holding Joe's old wallet, opened it and pulled out the driver's license. "Joseph P. O'Malley," he read aloud, mockingly. 78 years old. Yes, you really are old. He tossed the wallet back to the ground, near the medals. "I guess we'll have to take you to the station, Grandpa O'Malley, for obstruction of justice and for carrying suspicious items." He gave a little laugh, looking at his colleagues, who now seemed a little less comfortable but still complacent. It was at that moment that the sound began. A low, distant noise, but rapidly growing, transforming into the unmistakable roar of a V8 engine. Everyone in the parking lot turned. From the main road, a large, imposing black SUV appeared, with tinted windows and silently flashing blue and red strobe lights behind the grille. It was not a regular sheriff's patrol car. It was a state police department vehicle. The SUV entered the parking lot with an authority that made the air still. The doors opened. From the passenger seat, a tall man descended, wearing a dark gray suit, his face a mask of granite. From the driver's door, another man, wearing the full uniform of a state police captain. His eyes swept the scene, landing on the disrespected uniform in the trunk, on the medals on the asphalt, and finally, on Joe's face. The man in the suit walked directly to Deputy Miller, who suddenly seemed very small. "Deputy Miller." The man's voice was calm, but laden with an icy fury that chilled everyone's blood. "Can you explain why you are publicly humiliating former Chief Joseph O'Malley, the man who founded the State Academy from which you graduated, and who was my mentor for 20 years? Miller's world collapsed in that instant. His face lost all color. Arrogance evaporated, replaced by visceral dread. The rookies retreated, as if trying to distance themselves from the implosion they were witnessing. The man in the suit, the current state police chief, turned to Joe, and with a movement that was both a greeting and an act of profound respect, he straightened up and brought his hand to his forehead in a perfect military salute. "Chief O'Malley," he said, his voice heavy with emotion, "I deeply regret that you had to go through this. And it is at this moment, friends, where pride is undone and truth emerges with the force of a hurricane, that I need to pause. This story is about more than justice. It is about the essence of respect and the price of arrogance. If this narrative is echoing in your heart, if you are feeling that chill of seeing truth restored, then you are already part of our family. Your subscription here on the channel is not just a click, it is a virtual hug. It is you telling me, keep going, I'm here with you, and I want to hear your voice in the comments. Tell me, what are you feeling? What did this story awaken in you? This conversation is ours, and every word from you all is important for me to bring more stories like this, real and full of meaning. Let's build this together. The silence in the parking lot was absolute, broken only by the soft hum of the state SUV's engine. Deputy Miller's expression was a study in despair. His eyes, once full of scorn, were now glazed, fixed on the current state police chief, Benjamin Croft. He seemed to have shrunk inside his uniform. "Chief, I didn't know," he stammered, his words sounding hollow and insignificant. "Didn't know?" Croft's voice was a thin blade of ice. "Didn't you know that respect is due to every citizen, regardless of their age or the car they drive? Didn't you know that the uniform you wear represents the law and not your inflated ego? He didn't wait for an answer. His gaze turned to the medals on the ground. He bent down with a solemnity that made the air seem heavier and picked up the gold star for distinguished service, the same one Miller had thrown to the ground. With the tip of his jacket, he delicately wiped off the asphalt dust. Joe, the former Chief O'Malley, finally moved. He accepted the medal from Croft's hands with a silent nod. His eyes met Miller's, but there was no triumph in them. There was a deep sadness, a heavy disappointment. "Boy," Joe said, his voice resonating with the authority of someone who had commanded thousands. "This star was awarded for saving the lives of 3 hostages during a bank robbery in Houston in 1988. One of my men died that day. It is the price of duty. Something you clearly don't understand." The words fell like stones. The spectators in the parking lot, previously passive, now murmured in disapproval. Cell phone cameras continued to record, capturing every nuance of that spectacular fall. Chief Croft straightened up. "Deputy Miller." His voice was now formal, the tone used to pronounce a verdict. "For gross disrespect for authority, for shameful conduct, and for violating the civil rights of former Chief O'Malley, I am suspending you from duty, effective immediately." He gestured to the captain, who stepped forward. "You will hand over your badge and your weapon. Now." Miller's world disintegrated. His hand visibly trembled as he unpinned the badge from his chest, that small symbol of power he had used as a weapon. He handed it to the captain, who received it with professional coldness. The metallic sound of the weapon being collected echoed like a jail cell door closing. Miller was at that moment stripped not only of his authority, but of his identity. The 2 rookies, pale and shocked, were ordered to provide their names and identification numbers to the captain. Their statements will be formally taken. "I hope they have learned something today about the true meaning of police service," Croft growled. The scene that followed was one of poetic and brutal justice. As Miller, now just an ordinary, humiliated man, was escorted by the captain to the back of a newly arrived sheriff's patrol car, not as a colleague, but as a prisoner. Chief Croft turned to Joe. "Joe, can I take you home?" Joe looked at his old Impala, at the uniform in the trunk, and then at the crowded parking lot. He picked up his beret from the ground, placed it on his head with unshakable dignity, and nodded. "I think I've put on enough of a show for today, Ben." He got into Croft's car, the gleaming black SUV, a world away from his Impala. Before the door closed, he cast a final glance at the parking lot. People were no longer laughing. Many were clapping. Some, older ones, nodded in respect. Humiliation had transformed into redemption. Inside the car, the silence was comfortable. Croft was the first to speak. "I'm very sorry, Joe, I failed. The culture that allowed an imbecile like Miller to act like that. It's a failure of leadership." Joe looked out the window, the Texas landscape rushing by. "It's not your fault, Ben. The problem is deeper. It's about forgetting whom we serve. I spent my life trying to teach that. Today, a man had to lose everything to learn the lesson. It's a high price." He sighed. "But perhaps this story can serve for more than just that." The news spread like wildfire across a dry prairie. The videos of Miller's humiliation and subsequent downfall went viral, first locally, then nationally. The image of the chief's uniform in the old car's trunk, the medals on the asphalt, and Chief Croft's respectful salute became potent symbols. The story was irresistible. The architect of the state's modern police force, a forgotten hero, being humiliated by an arrogant representative of the new generation, only to be dramatically and definitively avenged. Joe O'Malley, the man who preferred the anonymity of his Impala and his coffee on the porch, was thrust back into the spotlight he so despised. The local sheriff's department went into crisis. Media pressure was relentless. The sheriff himself, a man who had served under Joe in the 90s, held a public press conference. He did not try to defend himself. Instead, he announced Deputy Miller's summary dismissal and the opening of a large-scale internal investigation into training practices and culture within his department. What happened with Chief O'Malley was not an isolated incident, he admitted, his face marked by shame. It was a symptom of a disease, and we will eradicate it. The Deputies Association, which initially tried to defend Miller, quickly retreated in the face of the avalanche of video evidence and public fury. They issued a statement vehemently repudiating Miller's conduct. For Joe, the following days were a flood of calls. Former subordinates, now spread across leadership positions nationwide, called to express their indignation and solidarity. The governor called personally. Joe answered each call with patience, but his mind was already working on a larger plan. He had been brutally forced out of retirement, but he would not waste the opportunity. He agreed to give a single interview, not to speak of his humiliation, but to talk about the future. Sitting on the porch of his simple home, with Chief Croft by his side, Joe spoke to a national reporter. "This isn't about me," he began, his voice firm. "It's about every citizen who has ever felt small before a misunderstood power. The problem isn't one bad deputy. The problem is a system that, in some places, forgot its primary mission: to protect and serve. To serve, not to oppress." He announced that, in conjunction with Chief Croft and the State Department, he would lead a volunteer task force to review and reform training protocols in all 254 counties of the state, focusing on ethics, respect for civil rights, and de-escalation of conflicts. The initiative was named Project Remembrance. Miller, for his part, faced consequences that went far beyond losing his job. He was indicted for civil rights violations and official misconduct. The civil lawsuit filed against him in the department was inevitable. His life crumbled. His fiancée left him. His family, ashamed, distanced themselves. He became an outcast, an example of what happens when arrogance overcomes humanity. Meanwhile, Joe O'Malley's already respected legacy was elevated to legendary status. His story was told in police academies, not as a tale of vengeance, but as a solemn warning about the danger of forgetting one's roots. The old green Impala, once a subject of ridicule, became an unusual symbol of humility and integrity, a silent reminder that true authority never needs to be announced. A year later, Joe O'Malley was back on the same porch, but the air around him was different. Project Remembrance was no longer just an idea, it was a vibrant reality. He had visited dozens of academies not to preach, but to converse. He told stories of his career, of successes and failures, and always ended with the parking lot story. That day, he would tell the wide-eyed recruits, that deputy wasn't seeing a man. He was seeing an old man, an old car, a stereotype. And when you stop seeing the person, you stop being a police officer. You just become a bully with a badge. His words, laden with the authority of experience and pain, echoed in young minds in a way manuals never could. The sheriff's department where Miller had worked underwent a complete overhaul. New procedures were implemented, sensitivity training became mandatory, and a community affairs office was created. The relationship between the police and the community, once tense, showed signs of healing. The sheriff himself, in an act of humility, invited Joe to a ceremony where the old Impala was, symbolically, placed on permanent display in front of the county's new training academy as a permanent monument to humility and service. Joe refused the honor for the car but accepted a permanent seat on the advisory board. On a quiet Saturday, Joe received a visit from Chief Croft. They drank coffee in silence for a while, enjoying the sunset. "You changed everything, Joe," Croft finally said, his voice soft. "That terrible situation, you transformed it into something good, something lasting." Joe shook his head slowly. "I didn't change anything, Ben. I just replanted a seed that was already there. People just need to be reminded why they wear the uniform. It's to serve, never to serve themselves." He picked up his cup, his eyes lost on the horizon. "Miller, I feel sorry for him. He was a stupid and arrogant boy, but the institution that should have shaped him failed him. And in a way, it failed me too. I hope that, wherever he is, he has learned." Joe O'Malley's story became a beacon of hope and a case study in resilience and character. He did not seek revenge. He sought redemption, not just for himself, but for an entire system. And in that silence on the porch, with twilight approaching, was the most eloquent proof that the deepest respect is not that which is demanded, but that which is earned through a life of integrity, and that sometimes the most powerful lessons are taught by the quietest teachers. And so this story that began with the darkness of arrogance ended with the light of redemption. If you've made it this far, if every turn of this narrative has touched your heart, then you understand the power a true story has to transform us. And I want to invite you, from the bottom of my heart, to be a part of this in an even more special way. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Your presence here is what gives meaning to every word narrated. And now, I really want to hear your voice. In the comments, tell me, what part struck you the most? Have you ever witnessed or experienced something that reminds you of this search for respect and justice? And what other stories of overcoming would you like me to tell here? This space is ours, a place to share and grow stronger together. Thank you for being here, for trusting my work, and for making this community such a special place. Until the next story.